When Ozzy Osbourne was rushed to the hospital in early 2023, few could have imagined that his final act of honesty had already been sealed inside a weathered envelope, hidden in a safe only his wife Sharon had access to. Rumors swirled for years about what the Prince of Darkness might confess, if given one last chance. And now, with the shocking discovery of a letter believed to be his final, handwritten message, a new chapter in the Osbourne legacy begins to unfold, one filled with secrets, regrets, and explosive revelations. But what exactly did Ozzy want to confess before it was too late? Let's begin. The letter was found in a place no one had searched in years, a rusted lockbox tucked behind medical documents in a temperature-controlled archive in Sharon Osbourne's private study. Its edges were yellowed, the paper brittle, the ink faded. But across the front, in Ozzy's unmistakable scrawl, were 5 words: "To be read if I die." It wasn't dated, but judging by the handwriting and phrasing, experts close to the family believe it was written sometime in 2014, after Ozzy had quietly suffered a medical collapse on tour in South America. He'd never admitted it publicly, of course. The press release at the time described it as exhaustion and dehydration. But now, with the letter's contents revealed, we know better. To understand the weight of what this letter holds, we need to go back to the late 70s, when the Ozzy Osbourne we know today was still forming. Black Sabbath had already made him a household name, but internally, things were crumbling. Drug use was rampant, money was mismanaged, and friendships had devolved into backroom deals and legal threats. By 1979, the band had ousted Ozzy, citing his erratic behavior and substance abuse. But in the letter, Ozzy paints a far more sinister version of events. "I was pushed out not just by the band," he writes, "but by a plan. Someone wanted me gone so they could control everything that followed." He never names the individual, but implies it was someone within the circle, a person he'd once called a brother. This paranoia, or clarity, depending on how you see it, would haunt Ozzy for decades. And the letter wasn't just a rant, it was a confession. He described the guilt he carried for things the public never saw. Cancelled shows not due to illness, but because of breakdowns. Bandmates paid off to keep secrets. Assistants who were silenced through NDAs and threats. He admitted that many of his infamous stunts, the dove, the bat, the stage collapses, were distractions, engineered with the help of his team to cover for deeper issues. Most shocking was this passage: "They didn't want me to die. They wanted me close to dying. That way, I kept making money, but never asked questions." The letter ended abruptly, unfinished. Some pages appeared to have been torn out. But what remained was enough to fracture the pristine narrative that had kept the Osbourne brand intact for decades. Jack Osbourne, the one who found the letter while digitizing old family archives for a private documentary, showed it to Sharon first. According to insiders, she locked herself in her room for hours afterward. When she finally emerged, she said only one thing: he wasn't supposed to leave this behind. Between 2003 and 2018, Ozzy Osbourne seemed to fade in and out of the public eye, touring one minute, hospitalized the next. Fans attributed it to age, illness, or the wear and tear of a rock legend. But the truth, as suggested by the letter and corroborated by recently uncovered audio tapes, is far more disturbing. Ozzy was being managed, not just professionally, but physically and psychologically. According to a confidant who remained anonymous, there were entire weeks where Ozzy didn't know what country he was in. He was being sedated between shows, the source claimed, not by force, but by trust. Behind the scenes, Ozzy was undergoing treatments for neurological disorders that had never been publicly disclosed. While Parkinson's became the official narrative in 2020, evidence suggests symptoms began as early as 2006. Instead of slowing down, his team accelerated the schedule. Every tour, every interview, Every appearance was sold as his last. It drove demand. It sold tickets. It gave the illusion of an icon still burning, even as his body begged for rest. In one unreleased audio clip from 2012, Ozzy mutters, "They keep saying one more tour, just one more. I don't even know what I'm saying up there anymore." The family dynamics during this time became strained. Jack was dealing with his own health scare, his multiple sclerosis diagnosis, and Kelly was battling addiction, much like her father had. Sharon, meanwhile, was holding the empire together with steel resolve, her hands in every contract, every call, every decision. Some say she saved Ozzy's career. Others believe she perpetuated his suffering. The letter gives weight to both arguments. "Sharon saved me from myself," Ozzy writes, "but sometimes I wonder if she saved me for me, or for the brand." This line hit hardest for fans, many of whom had come to see the Osbournes as a chaotic but loving family. But the truth in Ozzy's own handwriting cracked that image open. He felt trapped. Worshipped by the world, yes, but inside his own home, he was unsure if he was a man or a product. It was during this period, according to Jack, that Ozzy began keeping personal voice journals, rambling, slurred, but painfully honest recordings that he would leave on flash drives, tucked into drawers, and zipped inside jackets. Ozzy was leaving breadcrumbs, and the letter was only the beginning. To understand the magnitude of the secrets Ozzy carried on the road, you have to look past the concerts and after-parties and into the quiet moments between hotel check-ins and dressing room breakdowns. For years, he traveled with a small black case, never checked in, never out of reach. Roadies thought it contained medication, or maybe even some private memorabilia. It didn't. Inside were pages, some handwritten, others printed, detailing show accounts, handwritten notes on managers, receipts from suspicious transactions, and strange personal observations, often marked with the phrase, "Remember this." According to a former tour assistant, Ozzy began documenting moments he feared would be erased or rewritten. He believed there were people within his circle who were controlling the story being told about him in real time, adjusting financial records, filtering what the public saw, and in some cases, crafting outright fabrications about his health and mental state. One page simply read, "They told me I missed the Chicago show. I was there. I remember it. Why did the news say I wasn't?" Another page listed names, some crossed out violently, others underlined in red. Next to one, a simple note, "Paid to keep quiet about 2005. What happened in 2005 remains unclear, but it corresponds with a time when Ozzy reportedly collapsed backstage during the European leg of Ozfest, only for the incident to be scrubbed from public knowledge within hours. The letter discovered by Jack references these pages directly. Ozzy writes, "If they find the black book, they'll know, but they'll say it's the drugs talking." But the most damning revelation came from a note found stuffed in the same envelope as the letter. It contained a single sentence, circled 3 times. "Look into the royalties, 2003 to 2008. Something's wrong." When Jack consulted a legal expert in entertainment law, he was reportedly told that hundreds of thousands in earnings may have been misdirected during that period. But who was behind it, and whether Ozzy knew the full extent, remains an open question. One thing is certain. The Prince of Darkness wasn't just a rock god on stage. Off stage, he was a man terrified that his legacy was being rewritten without his consent. And as the tour bus rolled from city to city, he carried those secrets like a second spine, silent, heavy, and always threatening to snap. Ozzy Osbourne's departure from Black Sabbath in 1979 has long been considered one of the most notorious splits in rock history. Messy, drug-fueled, and inevitable. The official story was simple. Ozzy's addictions had spiraled too far. The band had to move on. But according to the letter Jack found, and the files stashed alongside it, that story wasn't just incomplete. It may have been a calculated lie. Buried within the handwritten pages was a passage unlike the rest. While much of the letter was chaotic and meandering, this section was chillingly clear. I was set up. They didn't want to fix me. They wanted me gone. Ozzy described a particular moment in mid-1979, just weeks before he was fired. During a rehearsal in Los Angeles, he had confronted one of the band's managers about missing funds, royalty payments that hadn't been delivered for nearly 2 albums. Jack tracked this down and found that, during one of Ozzy's hospitalizations in the early 2000s, his likeness was used in 2 high-paying ad deals without his consent. Deals Sharon later insisted were to keep the brand alive. This revelation pushed Jack into a new phase of grief. His father had been seen by the world as a freak, a rock god, a madman, but not as a prisoner. Now, Jack saw the truth. Ozzy hadn't been fully in control of his own legacy for decades. He was marketed, he was monetized, he was made into a myth, and the people who claimed to love him most, some of them had been pulling the strings. The music industry has a long and sordid history of financial abuse, hidden contracts, creative accounting, and backdoor deals that strip artists of their worth. But in Ozzy Osbourne's case, the magnitude of missing money bordered on criminal. When Jack began combing through the decades of royalty statements and licensing agreements, he noticed something strange. Entire stretches of income were missing from the records, particularly from the early 2000s, when the Osbournes reality show aired and catapulted Ozzy into a new tier of mainstream fame. The show had been a massive hit. Merchandising alone, from action figures to branded t-shirts, was projected to have earned millions. Yet the paperwork showed shockingly little of that money had ever reached Ozzy's personal accounts. A deeper audit revealed that multiple holding companies had been established in tax shelters. These entities owned the rights to Ozzy's image, his merchandise, and some of his solo recordings. The listed owners of these shell companies were masked behind law firms and offshore trustees. But there was one name that appeared over and over again: Osbourne Holdings Limited. It sounded official. It sounded like it belonged to the family. But Jack discovered that his father had never signed off on its formation. The majority stakeholder, it turned out, was a former associate of Sharon's, a music executive who had worked closely with her since the early 90s. The deeper Jack looked, the worse it got. One report suggested over $40 million in earnings had been siphoned into shadow accounts between 1999 and 2013. Some of that money was traceable. Some of it was gone. When confronted, Sharon didn't deny that the companies existed, but she claimed they were created to protect the family's assets from lawsuits and taxes. "Everyone does it," she reportedly told Jack. "You don't understand how this business works." But Jack couldn't let it go. He began documenting everything. He consulted forensic accountants. He even contacted former bandmates and road managers who corroborated stories of shows sold out across Europe, only for Ozzy to claim he hadn't seen a dime. In one particularly devastating note, Ozzy had scribbled, "I made everyone rich. I just wanted to keep the lights on. Sometimes I think if I dropped dead, they'd still tour a hologram and take their cut." It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about ownership, about how a man could give his soul to music and die wondering if he'd ever truly owned any of it. Perhaps the most stunning revelation from Ozzy's hidden archives wasn't in the letter itself, but in a USB drive tucked inside a beat-up leather case labeled simply Birmingham. On the drive was a single audio file. The timestamp showed it had been recorded less than 6 months before Ozzy's final public appearance, and its contents were unlike anything he had ever shared. It wasn't a song, but a monologue. The recording began with silence, then his unmistakable voice, raspy, weathered, but clear. "This is for no one, and for everyone. I don't know what they'll do with this when I'm gone. Maybe burn it, maybe sell it, but at least I'll say it." Over the next 38 minutes, Ozzy poured out his truth. He talked about the hallucinations that haunted him even in sobriety. The fear of forgetting his lyrics, not because of age, but because they had been drilled into him so deeply, he couldn't tell which thoughts were his anymore. He spoke of love, real, aching love, for his children, his regrets about missing their childhoods, his terror that they only knew him as the man on stage or the joke on TV. He spoke of Sharon, too, of the years they survived together, of the loyalty, of the betrayal. She saved me. Then she built a cage around me. I never knew which was which. But the most haunting moment came near the end of the tape. When I go, they'll say I was crazy, a bat-biting lunatic. But that wasn't me. That was what they needed me to be. I was just John. I just wanted to make music and not feel like I was drowning every bloody day. Then silence. And finally, if you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. So don't cry. Don't idolize. Just listen. That's all I ever wanted. Jack Osbourne has not confirmed whether he will release the recording publicly, but just knowing it exists, an unfiltered final confession from the Prince of Darkness himself, has already begun to change how fans, critics, and family remember the man behind the myth. The discovery of Ozzy's final letter, and the haunting audio that came with it, did more than just stir the press. It sent shockwaves through the music industry, through his family, and through generations of fans who had idolized the Prince of Darkness for decades. But the revelations forced a reckoning, with fame, with control, and with legacy itself. In the months following Jack's discovery, rumors swirled about a potential public release of the letter and recording. Legal teams assembled. Statements were carefully crafted. Sharon Osbourne, never one to shy away from the spotlight, made an appearance on a British talk show to preemptively address the controversy. "This isn't a scandal," she said. "It's a man trying to find peace in his final years." And he did. But not everyone agreed. Former bandmates, estranged friends, and even some music journalists argued that Ozzy's words painted a different picture, one of a man silenced, shaped, and sold by those around him. A rock legend who'd become a product. Rolling Stone published a retrospective titled Reclaiming John, the Ozzy We Never Knew. It highlighted not just the darker parts of his career, but also the brilliance often overshadowed by antics and addiction. Ozzy, they argued, was more poet than madman. And maybe that's what the letter was trying to say all along, but the backlash was fierce, too. Sharon's legal team issued cease and desist letters to several outlets that attempted to quote from the letter. Lawyers claimed the contents were forged, misrepresented, or taken out of context. Yet, behind the scenes, even they couldn't deny the voice in that final recording belonged to Ozzy himself. Meanwhile, fans were divided. Some called for justice, demanding transparency from the Osbourne estate and an independent investigation into the financial dealings exposed in the documents. Others didn't want their idol reimagined. They preferred the myth, the wild-eyed rocker, untouchable and eternal. Jack Osbourne stood in the middle of it all, visibly exhausted. In a rare interview, he explained why he brought everything to light. "My dad didn't want a statue," Jack said. "He wanted to be heard. Not the Ozzy you saw on stage or on MTV. Just him. And if this is the only way people will listen, then so be it." The estate is reportedly considering a limited release of the audio and a special edition biography incorporating excerpts from the letter. But insiders say there's hesitancy, fear that once the full truth is out, there's no putting the mask back on. And maybe that's the point, because in the end, Ozzy Osbourne didn't die as a caricature. He left behind something deeper, rawer, and far more human. A man who loved, who feared, who fought, and who finally, on his own terms, spoke. So now the question remains, will the world embrace the truth of John Michael Osbourne, or keep hiding behind the legend of Ozzy? Outro. The final letter has done more than just stir controversy. It's opened a wound that challenges everything we thought we knew about a legend. As the dust settles, one thing is clear. Ozzy Osbourne's real story is more haunting and human than anyone ever imagined. What do you think? Should the truth be shared or stay in the vault? Let us know below. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories. He claimed that the manager brushed it off, saying, "It's not worth fighting over pennies when you're the one costing us pounds." That same evening, he was offered what he described as a miracle cure, a combination of pills to help him sleep and something else to keep him level for the next day's press interviews. Ozzy wrote that he blacked out for nearly 18 hours, woke up in a stranger's apartment, and didn't remember how he got there. 2 days later, he was out of the band. In the letter, he didn't name which member or manager he believed had betrayed him, but he left a damning clue. It wasn't the suits who plotted it. It was someone I called family. The betrayal extended beyond the firing. Ozzy believed, according to further notes found in his private tour documents, that after his departure, certain members of the band continued to draw royalties from tracks he had written but were registered under new publishing entities. Essentially, his legacy had been split in two: the Ozzy who fronted Sabbath, and the Ozzy who was no longer allowed to claim parts of that catalog. In one scrawled note labeled 1980, "Don't forget," he wrote, "They kept the name, the deals, the rights. I got the shame." The emotional toll of this betrayal haunted him. Even in later years, when Black Sabbath reunited for concerts and brief collaborations, Ozzy was never at ease. Behind every photo op and performance was a look of exhaustion, something fans mistook for age, but his son Jack later revealed was emotional devastation. The letter ends this chapter of his life with a line that reads more like a warning than a reflection. "They'll stand at my funeral with their hands on their hearts. Don't let them speak." And just like that, the curtain on the Black Sabbath era closed. Not with a bang, but with a whisper laced with betrayal, lost trust, and stolen credit. The moment Sharon Osbourne read the letter in full, a fault line opened beneath the family. What was meant to be a private document, a raw, broken man's parting words, was suddenly a catalyst for confrontation, denial, and suspicion. And at the heart of it all was a question no one dared ask out loud. Had Sharon herself kept this hidden for a reason? Sharon and Ozzy's love story was one of legend, turbulent, passionate, enduring. But it was also a business partnership that spanned decades, survived infidelity, violence, and global scrutiny. Sharon wasn't just Ozzy's wife, she was his manager, protector, and, many believed, his puppeteer. When Jack revealed the contents of the letter to his siblings, Kelly reportedly broke down. She refused to believe that their mother could have hidden something so important. "He was your husband," she allegedly screamed. "You were supposed to protect him." Sharon stood firm. She claimed Ozzy had asked her to lock it away, that he was paranoid, confused, not in his right mind. But Jack wasn't convinced. He had seen the clarity in some of Ozzy's writings. He had heard the conviction in the audio clips his father left behind. And then came the real fracture. Jack wanted to go public. He believed fans deserved to know the truth about Ozzy, not the tabloid caricature or the sanitized TV dad, but the man who had survived, suffered, and finally spoken. Sharon forbade it. She believed the revelations would tarnish Ozzy's image, damage the brand, and hurt the family financially. According to a source close to the family, Sharon told Jack, "You want to honor him? Protect his legacy, not blow it up." But Jack pushed forward. He began assembling a private team to digitize and preserve Ozzy's notes and audio tapes. He met with media producers and began scripting a podcast series based on the recordings. He even contacted a publishing house to pitch a memoir, not of himself, but of his father's unheard truth. This sparked a near-complete breakdown in communication. For months, Jack and Sharon reportedly didn't speak. Kelly sided with her mother. A legal consultant was brought in to mediate rights over Ozzy's intellectual property. And all the while, the press began to catch wind that something was unraveling behind the gates of the Osbourne estate. One article in a UK tabloid hinted at a long-held letter, a fractured family, and a secret that could alter the course of metal history. It was no longer about one letter. It was about control. Control of Ozzy's story, his pain, his legacy, and the price of letting it all come to light. Ozzy Osbourne has been many things to many people. The godfather of metal, the clown of MTV, the tragic addict, the resilient survivor. But buried beneath all those personas was a man who, for most of his life, was screaming to be understood, and not just by his fans, but by his own family. The letter revealed a vulnerability the world had rarely seen. Ozzy didn't just fear death, he feared being misremembered. He feared being reduced to the myths others had created around him. "I wasn't a monster," he wrote. "I was a man trying to outrun his own shadow." Throughout the pages, he returns again and again to one theme: identity. Fame had given him a name, but it had stripped him of the ability to define it himself. He was Ozzy to millions, but never John to himself. Never Dad, not in the way he wanted to be. One of the most heartbreaking portions of the letter is a section addressed directly to his children. "I missed birthdays, not because I didn't care. I missed them because I didn't know what day it was. The pills, the plane rides, the panic. They swallowed me whole. And by the time I looked up, you were all grown." There are no excuses in this part of the letter, just sorrow. He speaks of late-night conversations with himself in the mirror, wondering if the young man from Birmingham, who once stole a single record because he couldn't afford it, would be proud of the man the world now called a legend. The answer, heartbreakingly, was no. "I made millions and still felt like I had nothing. Not because of the drugs, because I didn't know how to just be still and say, 'I'm okay.' I never felt okay." It's clear Ozzy wrote this not to scandalize or to burn bridges, but to peel back the decades of chaos and just be heard, one last time. In the final paragraph, he writes, "Don't let them turn me into a brand. Let me be a memory. Let me be real." For Jack, this became a mission. For Sharon, a dilemma. For fans, a revelation. Because at the heart of Ozzy Osbourne's madness was a man desperate to be understood. Not as a headline, not as a myth, but as a father, a husband, and a human being who lived far longer than he ever expected, and carried far more pain than anyone ever knew. Ozzy Osbourne was often portrayed as the wild, unmanageable force of nature, a man driven by impulse, addiction, and chaos. But the letter and accompanying files uncovered by Jack Osbourne painted a drastically different image. One of a man heavily managed, quietly manipulated, and, at times, entirely controlled. In several sections of the letter, Ozzy wrote about periods of his life where he wasn't making his own decisions, not entirely. He recalled touring schedules that were decided without his input, songs he didn't want to sing but had to perform, interviews he barely remembered giving. Some fans chalked these up to his drug use, but the documents suggest it wasn't always the substances. It was the system. One passage was particularly chilling. "They kept me high because I was easier that way. Easier to sign, to tour, to work. When I said no, they gave me a pill. When I cried, they turned up the lights and pushed me on stage." Ozzy never named names, but there are recurring references to a machine around him. A tightly controlled infrastructure of assistants, lawyers, handlers, and managers who ensured he remained both functional and profitable. It wasn't just Sharon. The network extended to record label executives, tour managers, and even close friends who became gatekeepers. In one part of the letter, Ozzy recalled waking up in Japan with no memory of how he got there. The tour had begun, the stage was set, and his face was on billboards across Tokyo, but he hadn't signed off on any of it. I asked when we'd agreed to it. They said I was there when the deal was made, but I wasn't there, not in any real way. I was just present. Jack's investigation led him to a box of old tour receipts and contracts. Many were signed under the effects of sedatives or post-rehab relapses. Some deals had backdated clauses, ensuring Ozzy's catalog would be licensed indefinitely without renegotiation. In many of those instances, the beneficiaries weren't Ozzy's children, or even Sharon. It was business partners he no longer spoke to. There's also mention of a clause in a 1997 agreement that allowed for control over Ozzy's public image to be handed to a designated media executive in the event of medical incapacity.